Hello, audience, and welcome to One Cell, One Light Radio with Dr. Hildegard Staninger, also known as Dr. Hildy. I am very excited today to introduce my special guest and our panel, which are going to be with us through the show and continue the second half of the show in an open discussion in a scholarly manner of our guest's brilliant work that he has done over the years. Our guest is Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. He is author of numerous books, The Giza Death Star, The SS Brotherhood of the Bell, The Cosmic War, which I contacted him years ago in reference to the diagram on that particular book, the front cover, because it matched with work that I was doing in nanotechnology in reference to the Eye of Horus, and also The Philosopher's Stone, Roswell and the Reich, and many other books that he's written, and also new books coming out. But in particular, we're going to discuss his book, Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men, because it's so current with what is happening throughout the world in artificial biology and other aspects of science, which is also known as the black science. Please, Dr. Farrell, please share your beautiful voice with our audience, and welcome to One Cell, One Light.
Thank you, Dr. Steilinger. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome, and call me Hildy.
Okay.
We've got...
Call me Joseph.
Okay. We're going to have a casual discussion, but in a scholarly manner. Our other guests are Michael Edward and also Rick DeBove, who's also a friend of Dr. Farrell and mine, and also in majors in art history, and Michael Edward in ancient text. So we thought, I personally thought, and I appreciate all of my panelists and also our special guest, Dr. Farrell, in sharing our knowledge so that we can bring it forward to the public and also archive it for history in the future, as I call it, because history is always changing and always being rewritten in many forms. I personally have read all of Dr. Farrell's books, and I loved when he came out with Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men, because I had a colleague, Dr. Robert Goswolf, that did a lot of archaeology findings on giants and in the United States, and was as an observer. So when this book came out, I thought it was interesting how everybody from different parts of science or anthropology or philosophy or looking in ancient texts were convergent, coming together. And you had, please, Dr. Farrell, explain what brought you about to write Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. What was the driving force for you to come up with that book, outside of your publisher? Hello? Rick, are you there?
I had trouble with the phone line, too.
Oh, okay. Well, we're sort of on the air, and I think Dr. Farrell will be calling back in if we've lost him.
Yes, we have. We lost him.
Okay. That's our other guest, Michael. And for the audience, I will share a little funny little chicken note, as to say. When we were trying to link Dr. Farrell together on the show, our radio station kept dialing, and we kept getting Dave at IRS. So I think it's very interesting that we lost him, and I'm sorry we lost him, but he'll be back. In this interim, so we can have him join, and I'll ask him the question again, but in the beginning of his book, he starts with the history of the using of the Babylonian text, where it was under ancient runes and also found in the Ishtar Gate of animal reliefs, which were done by a very famous archaeologist that was in the 1855 to 1925, which was Robert Coldwell, Koldewey, and he was the first to bring out the issue of the Sirrush, Sirrush, which is the dragon with the snake tail. And Dr. Farrell, we were asking you before we got disconnected of what was the driving force that allowed you to put together the Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men text, the book?
What was the driving force?
Yes, because it goes from archaeology, from early articologists to I'm going to say modern day aspects of gene splicing and dicing. It's a very vast book of a lot of relative facts within it.
Hello?
Well, I guess we lost him again. Rick, on you.
You gotta love live radio.
This is going to be a very interesting show. Hi.
I'm going to see if I can
there?
get it back. Okay. He still shows on. But I think we lost him.
Yeah, the phone line for me has come and gone. It's real weird.
Hmm. Well, did you ever study Caldwell? How do you say Caldwelly? Caldwelly? Koldewey. Coldaways. And audience, when Dr. Hildy cannot say a word, that means it's very important. So this gentleman must have contributed a lot to something. What was very interesting in this is that when they were looking at the reconstruction of the Gate of Babylon, it had these animal reliefs. And what is interesting is that now in current times, which we're going to discuss, is that there's a lot of splicing and dicing, and you can make these types of animals now, or half human, half animal, or chimeras. But what was, in addition to, was when this individual was bringing it out as an archaeologist and putting together the hieroglyphics of it through the pictures of the animals, which was the Serash. The thing is that it got challenged in sciences, and this gentleman went through a lot, and he had to be protected by, interceded by Kaiser Wilhelm at the turn of the century. Are you there, Dr. Farrell?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to fill in on the first part of your book in reference to the Gate of Babylon. And let me re-ask my question is, what initiated you to write this type of book? Because it's in 4 parts.
All of my books are really about the interface of modern science and ancient texts and ancient artifacts. It has always been to correlate ancient myth, ancient lore, ancient legend with the possibilities that modern science brings to bear upon them. In other words, might there have been a high science?
I think he was saying, audience, there might have been a high science, and that would bring into what the base of this book, too, is that the surviving elites of the cosmic war, which is what we're leading into discussion. Michael, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Do you have... this is going to be a very unique show. We feel it already. We're only 12 minutes into this, but this is okay. As Lucille Ball would say, the show must go on, and all
That's
the other
right.
celebrities in Hollywood. So we're going to try to do well with this. Do you have any comment, while we get the others back, on the Shirosh?
Actually, because I'm signed in as the host, I have to try to get Dr. Joseph back on here. So,
okay. Okay, I'll try to fill in. Okay?
Yes, you're going to have to wing it, Dr. Hildy.
Okay. We're going to have a history lesson, everyone, okay? And I like history.
I'll be listening.
Okay. Anyway, where I was going with this, Caldwelly's, Robert Caldwelly's, he was a very famous archaeologist, did many digs, but what he made, he was looking at that Dash Ishtar Babylon, the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. And in this is that it had specific reliefs. These, in particular, a creature that they called the Shirrush, Sirrus. The Shirrush was very interesting because it had feet like a bird, like an eagle, a body like a dragon with scales, and a tail of a snake. And this is interesting because on a lot of these, I'm going to call it ancient texts or ancient artifacts, they have in the chimera side of it always the like the tail of the snake on it. And he made this observation and was very impressed by it. And the problem that he was having is that during this time there was many opinions that were being circulated because the whole thing was in reference to how like the Greek versions of the Bell and the Dragon, of how these stories came about, as Daniel kills the dragon by poisoning it, versus how was this in relation to the history of that, not only the country, but dinosaurs, etc. This is the breaking point within history and science and archaeology at the turn of the century, where many scientists or readers of ancient texts were finding digs, within Egypt, other areas, Babylon, etc. And this professor, Robert Coldwell, he was very famous for his Teutonic background in ancient history and was looking at this animal, this chimera, which had the head of a dragon, the feet of a bird, and also the tail of a snake. And so he was looking at how it would interact with the ancient text or the mythology of those times, of like the Vikings or the Teutonic tales, etc. But in particular, he was always impressed that this particular image, the Shirrush, was always found throughout Mesopotamian art with an amazement of consistency. It matched their art, it matched their mythology, and it was a consistent chimeral creature. The Shirrush appeared in the context with other really existing animals, namely the now extinct aurochs and thus. So the thing is that during that time, we always think it's mythology, but did it really exist? And that's what we're finding in science, that you can make it now. But in this particular case, because it was so controversial on the first part of Dr. Farrell's book, that because he was presenting it in Germany at lectures, etc., in the Deutsches Lectures, introducing this work, it got highly controversial, and Kaiser Wilhelm was the first to hear these papers, and also came to intercede in the defense of the work of doing the scientific investigation. Rick, are you there? Dr. Farrell?
I'm back.
Oh,
yes, I'm back.
Okay. It's okay. I hope I have you on the rest of the show. I was just trying to fill in.
Dude, this
I don't
wild.
mean it any disrespect or anything, but when I can't say a name, it's my little clue within myself that it's very important whatever that person's name or the person of the item, and then when I can say the name, we've learned what knowledge we're supposed to do. And I was just sharing with the audience in reference to the Shirrush and Robert Koldewey's work in reference to how Kaiser Wilhelm had to even intercede in protecting him because of his size.
Let me stop you.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Kaiser Wilhelm did not intercede in the matter of Robert Koldewey. He interceded in the matter of another archaeologist by the name of Friedrich Delitzsch, who was also the premier Assyriologist of the day. And the reason that he did so was that Delitzsch discovered some cuneiform tablets dating from the time of King Hammurabi, which would be circa 2700 BC, in which clearly in cuneogram form you find the name Yahweh, in other words, the biblical name of God. Now, what Delitzsch did was he was invited to give a lecture before the Kaiser and his imperial court, and he pointed this out. And this caused a firestorm of controversy because what that effectively meant was that the claim that that name was a special revealed name of God to the Hebrews was somewhat suspect. In other words, it was challenging the whole notion of a special revelation to the biblical text. And this caused, of course, a firestorm in Lutheran Germany.
Right.
And
beyond Martin Luther.
Right, and Kaiser Wilhelm, in his capacity as the supreme bishop of the Lutheran Church in Germany, stepped in and put the matter to rest. But the controversy never really died. It's still raging to this day, as a matter of fact, over Delitzsch's biblical scholarship, and it's part of that whole milieu that you mentioned with Professor Koldewey, who discovered the Sirish on the Ishtar Gate of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem that was posed for Professor Koldewey was that the Sirish was in a context where it was surrounded by two other animals that were entirely real. And the other problem was that unlike other chimerical creatures depicted in Mesopotamian art, the Sirish was unique in that it seldom changed over time. And this led Professor Koldewey to the conclusion, which was very controversial in the day. Unfortunately, World War I was raging when he
right
around
them.
Right, and but he basically concluded that there was a basis in real fact to the Sirish, that it was some sort of creature, possibly a dinosaur like an iguanodon, that had been kept alive by Babylonian priests. Now, even to say that is very controversial, because there are no fossils of iguanodons in Mesopotamia, much less a living one at that time. So in other words, you know, he was opening Pandora's box, that there may be more reality to these artistic depictions and to these ancient texts that speak of chimerical creatures, and to the possibility that the divine name itself has a Mesopotamian origin that is much older than the Hebrew people and the so-called special revelation to Moses. So this is all very tightly interconnected.
Right, and also, and through these artworks that he was looking at, even in different kings slaying the lion, or fighting like in Naratu and Murdoch slaying the dragon with thunderbolts.
Right.
They're all showing some type of technology,
yes,
or I'm going to say science of cloning engineering or hybridization genetically,
yes,
that even though we look at it as possibly primitive drawings or ancient drawings, ancient tales, mythology, etc., we're finding in science that this is happening on a daily basis in certain circles.
Absolutely.
And that's the whole thing. Go ahead.
Well, I just completed another book called Grid of the Gods. It's the first book I've written with a co-author, but in it we state very bluntly that modern science is nothing but a technique of the magical and mythological imagination to bring into existence with consistent and predictable regularity the creatures and fantasies of ancient myths. So in other words, the suggestion by comparison of ancient texts with the techniques and goals of modern science means that there may have been a science that once underlay those texts. And that's basically been my argument and approach throughout all of the books that I have written about ancient topics, is the more that science advances, whether it be in biology or physics, what have you, the more that science advances, the more it looks like there is an actual basis in fact to some of these ancient legends.
Right, and I agree with you. I agree with you. Even in one of your books, which I think was the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, or anything. One of the books that I read of yours, you even brought out micro beads were used in 1934, which is what we call nanospheres now. But
yes.
What I'm saying is a lot of knowledge came from that time, or the exchange of scientists and other entities at that time after World War II, et cetera, that are being used in sciences now. And at the same time, anything goes. You can grow it in your refrigerator at home, as a matter of fact, if you know how to make it. But it's very important for the audience to understand what Dr. Farrell's saying. It is a time in the world where not only is the science, but the convergence of what is the mythology and everything that we have learned, even from Rudolph the Great, Rudolph II, where he funded a lot of the research of alchemy and science and math and everything. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There was a lot going on back then. That was the birth of our modern-day chemist. From those works. But at the same time, it's where now all of it is coming together, and we as observing and also as yourself, Dr. Farrell, writing about it, is seeing it because you're in depth into these scholarly books and other documents that you use, which I must say to the audience, and I commend you on this. Dr. Farrell has a gift of when he not only writes in his text, but he does beautiful footnotes, beautiful references, so that you can actually go look at those references and find them and read more in depth on whatever the subject is that he's covering in the book too. And it's to be commended because so many people don't reference right anymore.
Well, thank you for mentioning that because that's one of my that's one of my hot buttons actually, because there is so much shoddy writing in the alternative research community that basically people don't know how to reference, and they don't reference if they do know how to reference, and that basically means you can make up anything and put it out there just to sell a book. And my whole approach is I think that there is an academic case to be made for these ideas, and that hence, if you're going to argue a solid case, you need to reference it and let people look at these things for themselves. So yeah, I do reference my books rather heavily.
Right, and also in your book, in the first part of this book, Gene's Giants, Monsters, and Man, in particular on page 21 of the book, there is the use of symbols which were used for names, Ayavilu, Ivanilu, and Umalu. I'm definitely saying them wrong, but what I'm saying is that they are pictorial symbols for letters, which could even be in a mathematical code when you look at the symbols.
Well, yeah, I mentioned that idea that cuneograms bear in my first book, Giza Death Star, have a certain resemblance to something in mathematics called Ramsey graphs. There are certain early cuneograms that definitely have mathematical analogs. So yes, I would agree with that. I think the particular cuneograms that you're referring to there are precisely the cuneograms that Friedrich Delitzsch found in those ancient tablets of the name Yahweh that appeared, 1,000 years prior to the alleged revelation to Moses of that name and to the Hebrew people. So in other words, yeah, those cuneograms were very explosive. They still are to this day. There is still something of a debate raging in biblical critical and scholarly circles over whether or not Delitzsch was going too far with some of his conclusions.
And by going too far with those conclusions, being correct in his conclusions, possibly? Is that what you mean? Or bringing too much information out?
Well, a bit of both.
Okay, double-edged sword.
Delitzsch has been tarred with the brush of anti-Semitism, which is the scholar's last resort, if you want to call into question the argument that he's making. And the argument that Delitzsch really made was one that's been made by others in a different way and in a different context, and namely that is that the character of the biblical God Yahweh is hardly the character that you would associate with a God of love and mercy and forgiveness. I mean, he's
right.
a pretty bloodthirsty fellow. So, and this was Delitzsch's point. He was simply pointing out that the name itself was not unique to the Hebrews. It existed long prior to the Hebrew people. There were problems with the biblical text. There were problems with the morality in the text, and so on and so forth. So he's been kind of tarred with in my opinion, somewhat justifiably, but that's also somewhat unjustifiably by modern biblical scholarship.
Also, in your book, on the first part, I'm addressing that first, is that you brought out the philosophies of also the writings of Knight and Butler in reference to what was their book, The Great Wall of History, and
right.
Which that wall was, audience, was silence. And in the work, they were quoting and mentioning Thomas Jefferson in reference to Masonic work, but at the same time, it's where they keep referencing a term, and you used it in your book, which was called very high antiquity.
Yes.
What is your opinion of what is very high antiquity?
Well, my basic thesis, it's a thesis that I've been outlining in all the books having to deal with ancient history and science and technology, but principally it's a thesis that I outlined in my book called The Cosmic War. And that is that in very ancient times, in other words, before human prehistory itself, in other words, we're talking anywhere from several 100,000 to a couple million years ago, there was an ancient civilization that possessed a sophisticated science, probably in excess of our own. And it's my belief, based on some ancient texts, based on some space anomalies, that this civilization existed in our solar system, that it was of interplanetary extent, and that it quite literally fought a war and blew itself apart, blew its infrastructure apart. And as most combatants in wars that are that destructive do, as the war draws to its close, you see the formation of elites with long-term survival plans and strategies. And I think this is what happened at the end of that cosmic war. So what I'm doing with Babylon's Banksters, Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men, and Grid of the Gods, is I'm tracing what I think is the signals or footprints of those elites after that war and how they're attempting to recover lost science that they possessed back in high antiquity. So that's basically what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm. And these elite, from either passing down the knowledge through generations, or I'm going to quote secret society, any way that they would do that way, or do you think that some of the ones that, because with gene therapy and other things, it could be possible that, do you think any of these, and I'm not holding you to this, entities that could have been in that battle that could be here would be still alive from the original, or?
Well, let me put it this way. You're referring to entities, and I've tried in my various books to outline the case, and this is kind of the basic thrust of Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. To outline the case, number one, that humanity, the species Homo sapiens sapiens, is a part of a genus that we may have genetic cousins out there somewhere.
Right.
And, of the genus Homo sapiens. And they came here. If you read the ancient texts from Mesopotamia all the way to Mesoamerica, if you read these texts, it's clear that there was some sort of manipulation, genetic manipulation, that brought humanity into existence from whatever pre-existing hominids there were here on Earth and then these genetic cousins. So if you take those texts seriously, then you have to take the text seriously when they say that some of these people at the end of that cosmic war left this planet, and in various traditions some of them went underground, and in some traditions the rest of them dispersed themselves over the surface of the Earth. So could it be that they're still around? Certainly, that's a possibility.
That's one of them. And I know a lot of the work that you're referencing in that question was in reference to the O'Brien's work and the Cellera's programs for the assembler, where they use the example of the fruit fly and other types of triggers. And at that time, some of the texts would call it DNA islands or overlappers, etc. Now, I know from what basic toxicogenomic work that I was doing with our molecular biologists and stuff like that, we found that the ancient genes, I'm talking ancient genes that were the main alleles on the main allele of that DNA code for the human, meaning, patients or individuals that would come for that test, they could go back 5,000 years easily by showing the civilizations, even down to military elite, Olmecs, etc. I mean, it's really interesting, audience, how museums and different archaeology digs now, when they find different civilizations, or that they can take DNA samples of that, and then you can have your DNA done and see if it matches into that genome of that, I'm going to say that nation, that civilization, as a tribe that way. But what we've also found is how, as you introduce gene therapy that could be from a certain group, example, in the radiation use of gene therapy, where they took in Chernobyl, the Belarus individuals that were exposed to that radiation, took their genes, made, quote-unquote, an antidote to radiation poisoning, using gene therapy, that gene would overlap your own natural genes, so you would also test positive for a gene titer of Belarus, when before that you didn't have that Belarus in it. Example, you could have had 21 titer, now it's 7,000 titer. So with what you're saying, too, in your book, of the overlap of ancient genes that could go pre 5,000 years or older, they could be overlapped, and we definitely know there's a lot of junk DNA, meaning for the audience, DNA that none of us know what it matches to, that could also be triggered by certain events or certain conditions within the body to express themselves, like in a fail-safe of something. But I think we're going to find a lot more information coming out in reference to this overlap. As a scientist, I was quite surprised of how much that gene stuck to the main allele and overlapped the true identity of the genetic material that was already pre-existing there when we did these tests.
Is that a question?
No. It's just a statement. It's just a scientific little blurb that is confirming what you put on in your text in reference to overlapping genes.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if I'm seeing overlapping genes as a result of just the introduction of new gene therapy or something within a human being, definitely. If the text and everything shows that these elites existed, et cetera, this way, it definitely could be overlapping genes.
Right, and
to be expressed.
I think you put your finger on a suspicion I've had about the Genome Project all along, and that is that they're looking for something. They're looking perhaps for confirmation of some of these ancient texts, and in particular possibly looking for the actual codons that express that alien element within our DNA.
Right.
And since you mentioned junk DNA, they're probably looking in males for that, because the ancient texts make it very clear that the so-called divine component, or the gods, or the Anunnaki, whatever you wish to call them, that the donor for that part of modern humanity came from one of their males, and then whatever hominid was here that they were engineering with was the female donor. So this I think is one reason you find much more open discussion about mitochondrial DNA within the genetic literature than you do the Y chromosomal DNA.
Right, and the mitochondrial is more dominant from the female, and that's where they proved on the Homo sapiens that the 7 bloodlines, or
right.
the 7 daughters, or the 7 sisters, whichever book you read,
right.
in reference to how that was developed. And a lot
right.
of that work is being done, where you were educated, and I was born in England, in the sciences of I feel matching these ancient texts, and also a lot of the, it's not cloning, but the introduction of injection of foreign DNA, such as an animal DNA, into a human ovum.
Recombinant.
Yeah, recombinant, yes.
Technology.
And that just happened 2 weeks ago, where it was announced on
yes.
a press release that they injected 150 million human eggs in London. So there's definitely experiments going on. Even now, I mean, mice can have human blood. Organs can be grown. Human liver can be grown out of a pig. Last week I had a show where we know that dogs can have different pigments put into them that are fluorescent, but they were clone puppies. I'm calling them puppies, but clone dogs, and they glow in the dark. So.
Yes.
Let's put it this way, if someone has the money and they want to buy it, it's an open market right now, I feel,
right.
in the science. And that's where there's always a level, or the hairline crack. Do you cross it and do that type of work or not? Or you say it's in the advancement of science or that, but there is a morality involved on that. And when it goes into these darker sides, that's what I call it, the dark sciences, or any of this, because it's bottom line is the thing I personally feel that is driving it is just basically greed and control of everything, you know?
Well, this is precisely one of the points I make in Gene Stein's Monsters Men. You cannot patent a naturally occurring organism, but you can, in law, patent a genetically modified or altered sequence. And I think this is part of the game plan. By introducing enough artificially modified animals, plants, and ultimately humans, basically what you're turning life into, including human life, you're turning it into property of somebody. And this is a very, very dangerous precedent. In fact, I talk about that whole development within law at great length within Gene Stein's Monsters and Men, because
yes.
it has a particularly nasty implication. If you go back and read these ancient texts that very clearly indicate some form of technology is involved in creating mankind in the first place, then under our own law, this would mean that we're someone's property. Now, the problem is, what if the original owners come back? Will they attempt to press their claim? Who's going to hear the case? Or having abandoned the property, which is also a component of Western jurisprudence, then essentially that property reverts to whoever's occupying it at the moment, namely us.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, this raises some very, very thorny issues.
Right. No, and I'm very glad you're bringing this out, because it is highly controversial, very, I'm going to say, cutting edge in the law, because there is companies that make synthetic DNA, et cetera.
Oh, yes.
You can order what you need to make a DNA plasmid to express certain activities of the genes, even to make you taller, shorter, live long, et cetera, this way. But at the same time, what we're talking is the ancient genes, or the junk DNA, which no one really knows what that expresses into.
Right.
They're playing with fire, as far as I'm concerned, and I
would agree with you. And particularly in the case of junk DNA, there's all sorts of in my opinion, and I stress the fact that I'm not a scientist. I'm simply a documents researcher. But in my opinion, you have, with junk DNA, with the explanations that are out there, that this stuff basically crossed species or jumped species, and one of the most ludicrous is from rodents to humans. Right. This is a non-explanation. I think this sort of thing is really an indicator that they know that there's something radically different about the vast amounts of junk DNA within humans. And this may be the marker of a genetic injection from off this world. It may be something entirely different. We don't know. But I'm with you. I think this is playing with fire.
Right, and also you brought up earlier in reference to the use of science and not mysticism, but meaning the alchemy of it, et cetera, and proving the ancient legends, meaning the mythological creatures. Yes. The thing is, too, with any of that, with many of the, I'm going to say, ritual activities where they might be chanting harmonic, et cetera, whether it's in a cave, whether it's in a certain cathedral due to the design or anything, it can make different sound, and that sound resonance can be a harmonic, and certain harmonics can, through DNA cellular linguistics, which I've been pioneering in, this can cause DNA to express itself and give the right signal and code to be the best of what you are, the very best. Or it could also, if linked with other types of foods or other types of compounds, express what you do not want to express, meaning the manipulation. And where I'm going with this is, and to me, the wild card has always been the viruses, because they are actually a crystal, as with many chemicals. The more polluted you are in the body from a chemical, the more chance of making like a liquid crystal, which now they use liquid viral crystals in nanotechnology. But the thing is that can give the mislighted, meaning the wrong amount of photons or the wrong frequency, the phonon, into the cell, so that the cell hears the wrong message and doesn't get expressed. And what I also find interesting, and I've always been studying this on this, as I call it, on the side, which is right after major events, there's always different robberies within museums of ancient relics and ancient relics that possibly could be used in some ritual that would be expressing something.
Yes,
I just find it very interesting, that occurs, and it's been occurring, all throughout time. But when you're seeing advancements in different sciences and different artifacts disappearing, I just think it's quite interesting. That's all.
Well, I would agree with you. In fact, I mentioned the Baghdad Museum looting in a couple of my books, and my suspicion is that at least one of the very deeply hidden reasons for injection of American and British force into Iraq was precisely to recover some of these cuneiform tablets, which incidentally there's anywhere from 80 to 100,000 of these that are still missing from that looting. Now, what's interesting to me is
I think, audience, we lost Dr. Farrell, and he had an important point in reference to the...
Hello, Hildy.
Go ahead. Can you?
I'm still
can you
here. I'm
interject?
just listening. I'm listening to you guys in this great conversation, but the phone's been funny today. Yeah.
Yeah, and in this, do you have any comment of what Joseph was saying in reference to the looting of the museum there, the similarity?
Well, I will only make the comment that when he first brought that up, and he brought it up a couple of years ago, I thought, I thought it was slightly far-fetched, but now I don't think it's far-fetched at all. I think it makes total sense.
Because they not only looted those tablets, but they also looted those little tiny collectible dolls, not dolls as we know it, meaning like jars, audience.
Yeah.
And there's very few collectors of those artifacts within the world,
Yeah.
and even can read the text of that. So I think it's a very important point.
Dr. Hildegard Steniger, may I make a comment here?
Yes, sir.
I think that what we're doing with these portals to healing is it's a beautiful crossover between this remote antiquity and the present.
Yeah, it's the bridge.
It's a bridge, or maybe not even a bridge. Maybe just a synonymous thing.
Yeah, because they're very unique and very significant for the owner of their own portal. That way, audience. It's a new feature, and Rick is pioneering that. But he's connected as, I'm going to call it, the universal architect in that area. Now, with after the museums and that, the thing is that with any types of gene manipulation, one is to cover it up, as we stated, so it overlaps other genes so they could not be expressed, versus we know with the fastest changing of a gene is either chemical or radiation, and all of us have been exposed to radiation and what is happening in Japan, and those in particular, the residents of Japan, in particular the Japanese, they have always been known, or as said through their system, as being the original, the original lineage from the gods. So from the sun god, especially with Emperor Jimmu, which was the first royal line of the chrysanthemum. But I think it's interesting that now it's a time of not only of what is the elite antiquity, who are the royals, what are the philanthropists, the bankers, everything is changing.
Excuse me, I'm coughing, but I think Dr. Farrell's point about this remote antiquity, because we think it all began like in 4000 BC, but there was a whole history before that, out of which the 4000 BC dating was related to via a cosmic war. And boy, that certainly makes the picture different.
Right, and in this cosmic war, these individuals that fought in that war, they were very tall, correct? From the readings I've read. I mean, taller than, I'm going to say the average person is 6'2" now. Yes, we have taller 7 feet basketball players that are this way.
Well,
but
I'm back.
Dr. Farrell is back, so I will jump out. I'm sorry. I was just filling in with some ideas, but go ahead. I'm just listening. Go ahead.
The thing that I say in the Cosmic War is that there appears to be some connection between ancient legends of giants and the people that fought these wars. And let me give you an example. The word for king in ancient Sumerian, I believe, was the Lugal A, and this meant quite literally big man. The word palace quite literally meant big house. So you have an interesting etymology taking place in the ancient languages and it's paralleled with the depictions of these kings on their ancient cylinder seals. In comparison to normal humans, you find these enormously tall people,
right,
that are supposedly the kings and queens and gods and so on. Well, I think, again, you're dealing with the possibility that if you're dealing with an exploded planet, like I outlined in the Cosmic War, that is much larger mass than the planet Earth, a solid planet, then the possibility arises that the people, if there are anybody living on that planet, that they're going to be of much larger stature. They're going to have to be, in a certain sense, to cope with greater gravity. So, yeah, it's all kind of dovetailing together.
Right, and also in archaeological finds, even in the Utah Flats, where they have the Brewer plates, there's
right.
Hieroglyphics on the, I'm going to call it the mountainside or the side of the rocks there, in addition to caverns, caves, square
right.
rooms, bones of the lady, I can't remember her name, which was the giant that we have a picture of out on the site, where she had, strawberry blonde hair, reddish, and she was 8 feet tall. And it may even be that they've always said Hollow Earth exists, and could be underground, and even maybe that these other areas where they get closer to the surface that they bring when this person, the giant, passes away, or this larger, taller life form than what we are currently, that they go to higher ground, more to our Earth's surface,
Right.
Going out. But they're finding a lot of different sites, and there could be hundreds of them out there that we just don't know.
There have been reports throughout history of giants, of human encounters with giants, all the way from the classical world in the Eastern Mediterranean to Mesoamerica, North America, and so on. There are sightings or legends or stories all over the place. What
right.
I think is very interesting is that in the known finds of large stature humanoid creatures, you do find this consistent reference to red hair, which I find is very interesting because in the legends of Mesoamerica in particular, the god Quetzalcoatl is sometimes described as either a blonde-haired or red-haired, bearded, blue-eyed, sort of very large stature Caucasian. And this, you find legends like that all over the world, and it's very, very interesting that you have these stories and discoveries now that seem to be corroborating yet another aspect of some of these ancient legends and myths.
Mm-hmm. And many times those expressions of those genes would come out in generations. You might have
right.
dark-eyed individuals, and then all of a sudden have a tall, blonde, blue-eyed individual that
right.
is 6.5 feet. That's 6'6".
Right.
I mean, that is not the giants. In your reading of the text and all of your research, what was the tallest giant that you were able to document or find?
Well, it's actually in the book The Cosmic War, and I make reference to 19th century French work that collated stories and reports of these giants, and there was one that was reported to be approximately 36 feet tall. So,
wow.
Yeah, we're dealing with very large people.
Very large people. Very large people. That's like six-footers.
Right. Right.
Very tall, and also in those particular ones that they found, that they're 36-foot giants. Did they find any clothing remnants or anything?
Well, this was simply a French work that collected stories. Now, there was no, to my knowledge and recollection, there was no accompanying evidence. But in the case of the giant remains that had been found in Ohio or Illinois, I forget which state it was, there was a report of clothing, of soldiers basically being buried in their armor with their weapons and swords. So in some cases, yeah, you do have stories about what they found.
Right, and any of these events. That's a large find, even to have a room or anything for a 36-foot. Even if it's a legend individual, it'd be very large.
Right.
That way. And Dr. Farrell, we're coming up on the hour. I do not know if you'll be able to join us on the second part, but you're more than welcome to. I know, and you've had an interesting day. Would you like to share what is your new books are coming out and other things that we did not cover?
I have a practice of not talking about what I'm writing about until the books are actually at the printer. So I'm afraid I have to kind of keep that quiet for now.
Okay, and we understand and we appreciate that. And by this humanoid connection, I think we're going to cover it on the second part in reference to what's being done in science and like the pyramids in Antarctica that are being found and other things that augment with what you found in the book. And I apologize that we had bad connections, but I think we got some important things out, and I appreciate everything. And I know your time is very significant, and thank you very much for being my guest.
Well, thank you for having me on, Hildy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated. And audience, we're going to connect on the second half and have open discussion in reference to these topics of genes, giants, monsters, and men on the second half with Michael Edward and Rick DeBove, both of them friends and guests of mine, as with Dr. Farrell. Thank you again, and we'll get you on the second half.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Welcome back, audience, to our second half of our show entitled Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men, based on the book by Dr. Joseph Farrell, who was our guest on the first half. We had some communication problems with our station in that, but we hope we persevere and go forward. And I have on with me now in panel discussion Michael Edward and also Rick DeBove, so that we can elaborate more on what we were discussing on the first half and what its role in current sciences that we're experiencing now professionally and also in everyday life. Are you there, gentlemen?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. This is Rick DeBove, the painter philosopher.
Okay. And Michael, are you there?
I sure am.
Okay, and you're great at asking questions, so I'm going to ask you to lead the discussion, and we'll share our thoughts.
Okay, something that Dr. Joseph or Dr. Farrell was speaking about. He brought up something about genetics, and that things go through the male line when it comes to genetics, and I can't say that I really totally agree with that.
What he was talking about was in reference to quote unquote the divine God, meaning these higher antiquities.
Mm-hmm.
That's what their texts say, that it comes through the male side, versus, that's where I was going on, the Seven Sisters, it's really the Seven Daughters of Eve, book that came out in year 2000 or 1999, in reference to how they follow the human Homo sapiens through the mitochondria of the female.
Well, true, when it comes to mankind flesh, just as the same with all animals, the genetic lines are always predominant in physical features with the female, but also with the image or godlike features of spirit as well.
Right.
And then you get into going into more ancient books like the Gospel of the Holy 12. Of course, I'm talking about books at this point that are not in a modern-day Bible, ancient texts and such that are considered by Rome as not allowable. And after reading them, over much, much more than a decade, I can understand exactly why. this is part of the key of what's going on, and especially when you're talking about genetics, which is really nothing new. We talk about synthetic genetics now as if it's something new. It's not something new. When you have spirit, whether you want to call it angel, as a fallen angel, as the book of Enoch 1 says, we have these watchers who are angels, which are created spirit, and then they're watching over mankind, which is a created image of God in a 3D physical form. Let's just put it this way. Let's call mankind matter, and let's call spirit creation antimatter.
And may I throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing here?
Oh no! Go ahead, Rick.
I've read a lot about and have been long fascinated with the work of Antoine Béchamp, the French biologist from the 1870s, whose work, his observations have actually been made by 50 thereabouts biologists since that time, terminating in Gaston Naissance, who's from French-Canadian. Now, and they talk about this little dancing electrically charged particle, and Béchamp called it the somatid, which is a tiny body, and then Naissance and the rest of them. Now, and they propose that it is actually a precursor to DNA. The DNA is down the chain, maybe 5 steps down the totem pole. And it's the only thing that survives any living organism, whether it be plant, animal, or human. So, I am...
That somatid could have its own, which it would have its own energy field, its own, I'm going to call it resonance, its own identity, which is housed within the cellular mass, the first cell, the ovum, or whichever cell we're looking at from whatever species it is.
And from what I understand, is basically, he calls it the 16-stage pleomorphic cycle, which is when a human body is, or a plant or an animal is dying. The somatid, and then with this tiny, energetic, condensed particle, turns into a whole series of bacteria, and then the bacteria evolve into fungal forms. And at the end, there's a thing called the thallus, Thalus, and it releases all these new somatids. By the same token, though, Naissance did an experiment where he put fresh cubes of meat in a totally sealed container covered by glass. But before so, he injected somatids, free of any DNA or anything, totally independent somatids, into the meat. The meat not only did not rot, it started to grow new meat. I find this rather amazing.
That's the spark of life beyond the 3D physical form.
Yeah, like a quickening, the cosmic cellular burst within a cell.
What we have with the somatid, as Naissance calls it, is it's a how would we say? It's a physical body in a way, but that's immortal. It doesn't die. It's the only thing that's left after a human or a plant or an animal dies is the somatid. And I'm just not to deny DNA. And in my opinion, and really, I'm an artist. I read and think and so on. But it's the most important thing about DNA is it's that spiraling shape. That may be mostly the generator of what happens.
Right, because it's at a certain angle too.
It's like angular momentum even, I don't know. Anyway, that's just an artist talking, artist philosopher.
Well, my take on it, to to agree with you, and I had never heard about that from that particular biologist, so that's really interesting. That's why I love listening to these shows. I learn a lot.
Unique things, because
there's Michael, there's a particularly good essay by a guy named Christopher Bird, who is the co-author of Secret Life of Plants with Peter Tompkins, and he wrote a great essay about the work of naissance and the somatid. And if maybe after the show you can call.
Right.
I'll give you the email, and I'd love to forward it to you because it's fascinating. Jeez.
Right, and in this, he also used the ultramicroscope, so subcellular aspect of it, very similar to like what we have the atomic force microscope or any of these things that they could see what was still alive on this study 18 months later. So I think it's a good reference, and we'll put that reference on the site too with this portion of the show so that they can see it.
Yeah, and Deschamps, by the way, called it the microzyma. He was the first to see it with, not great microscope. It was the 1870s, but he could see it. And he also found it in chalk samples 1 million years old, and would put the chalk samples in water, and these dancing charged particles would come alive again.
Wow.
It'd be interesting to see if did any of the work that he did, or any of these other individuals, like Christopher Bird or anything, he wrote the essay on Gaston, but did any of them say that there were so many somatid particles, like in a human versus in a bacteria, or did it only have one?
No, there's more than one, and they proliferate. And you can see them in the naissance photography. This, and they're what they look like is like little electrically charged particles that are bouncing into each other, bouncing off each other. It's very fascinating, which is not to deny DNA. I don't mean to say that.
No, but I do know that when I had anyone that was exposed to advanced nanomaterials throughout their body, which basically was plastic suffocating them, when that happened, they always made a comment. They felt like their soul was leaving them, like shattered. And in this, I'm looking at the aspect of the somatid as being some type of, I'm going to say, particle that could house an energy field, or something that could be basically very similar to the particles that are in the photon, where they're diphotons that are welded together with far infrared, because the more far infrared you have in the body, that whatever it is in the amount that you're supposed to have for your temple, you have more life in your body, more activity, more energy, more a younger appearance. It's good for the whole body. So I was just thinking that maybe a somatid might be I'm going to say a particle resonance in a 3D world to the link to the spirit, as we've heard of the silver cord, etc. This way, it'd be interesting if somatids had silver in them too. Just as philosophical.
Well,
I'm just throwing it out. I really don't know.
That is my suspicion too. Is that it is a it has the peculiar characteristic of being an immortal. And by the way, I might add that Naissance tried everything, and this is without, he extracted, totally isolated the somatid and bombarded it with massive heat, radiation, everything, and they don't get destroyed. They absolutely remain there.
So that's not genetic, it's not DNA, it's not 3D, it's not flesh, it's something else.
It lives in this kind of netherworld between the physical, and even in that essay they suggest, it's an immortal particle of energy.
Well, that's what I was saying. Let's call mankind, simplify it, or everything in the flesh, or everything that's in this 3D. Let's call that matter,
Right.
since we are matter, and let's call that spiritual aspect, or whatever name we're going to give that creates this 3D. Let's call that antimatter, just to simplify it.
That's a good point.
Though I'm sure that scientifically that might not be totally correct, Dr. Hildy. I'm not sure, but that's the way
No,
that
that's a simple version. I agree with it. You know.
Okay. Well, I've never run that by anybody before because it just hit me yesterday, and when I was talking to a mutual friend of ours today, I explained it that way. Is let's just call Creator, Spirit, God, whatever name is put in there, let's just call that aspect antimatter, because it's something that could create matter, which is what we are and what the earth is.
But you know what's interesting, Michael, I think in what this whole idea of the somatid brings up is that this is it's the bridge between the two. It's not matter and it is matter. Because it's what it is, and it's indestructible. The somatids never go away. DNA, when a person dies, their DNA or the physical, materials of DNA may go with them, right? But the somatid never dies. It's most fascinating.
Well, that even describes angelic spirit beings from Christian text and other texts as well. It will not die because it can't die in this 3D physical. It's not from this 3D physical, and it can't really die. Let's just, for simplification, there's an angel. An angel is created. So is mankind, but these are different realms of creation. And that's what I wanted to tie in with Dr. Farrell's book. We're going to talk about genes, giants, monsters, like his book says, and men, or mankind. There are giants, and if you'll go back in some of the ancient texts, like Enoch 1, especially the book of Enoch, you'll hear how it was written that there were watchers, which were these angelic beings, or aliens, if you want to put it that way, who were not created the same as man. Okay, man has his own creation in his own way. That's the way the Creator did it. Angelic beings, if we're going to call them that, or spirits, or aliens, or whatever name you're going to put, have their creation as well, but it's not in our realm. However, according to lots of ancient texts in different countries, different languages, so many of them have the same story, where you have these spirit beings who can manifest from that spiritual realm into a physical realm. And there's where we get into the giants, just like Enoch says, and that's the alteration of physical mankind genes. And if you really want to get down to it, let's throw in even though the modern Bible agrees to a certain aspect, let's throw in the whole, quote, Christianity aspect. And that is, in order for mankind to escape this manifested genetic perversion between the angelic watchers who were fallen, which there were 200 of them, and for mankind to be so-called saved. I hate using some terms sometimes because people count them as religious, but let's just say to save God's creation of man, the only way to do that was for God to manifest in pure, absolute pure, of which in our realm is male and female, to manifest as the Son of all mankind as well as being the Son of God. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and it's, I remember I once owned a copy of the Book of Enoch, and it was an English translation of it. And they talked, they gave, in the Book of Enoch, there's a very specific discussion of giants. And they came out to be like 35 feet high.
Just
that
like
would be
36
the
years, 36 ones that...
Hello.
Yeah, that's the Watchers. Well, guess what, Rick? You and I have lost our host.
Oh, my God. Yeah, the phone has been funny. Let's put it that way. Well, I'll tell you what. I must step out for 2 minutes. I'll be right back, and hopefully you get the host back.
Well, I've got our producer Lynn working on that right now. So,
okay, Michael, I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem. I'll hold it down till we can get Dr. Hildy back on here. Anyway, well.
Hello?
Hi, you're with us.
Okay. Sorry, audience.
I'm not ready to go on a solo. Darn.
Yeah, I tell you, it's the subject matter. It's the universe giving us codes in DNA as we're making new points.
I guess, this is a subject that religionists don't want to discuss, that, as you know, a lot of scientists don't want to discuss. It's kind of like a no man's land. How do you combine science and ancient artifacts with ancient history to make sense of it all? And part of what your show is today is we're all coming out with things that are tying it together. And that just might not be very comfortable for some people.
Right, and then sometimes, when these things occur where you don't know what's right or wrong, always go with what's in your heart, because that's what I feel the true thing is sometimes when our brains get messed up, in thought.
Hildy, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
You're a scientist, you understand genetics and all that. Rick kind of made a comment, which I think I have to agree with to a big part, that DNA, genetics and such is really kind of on the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to creation. It's the physical aspect of it, but it's not by itself the God part.
Correct. Correct. I personally believe in that, and I've seen example of that. Meaning, genetics, meaning the DNA is like the book, the blueprint, the way to do it. Okay, and it can have many wild cards in it, meaning the virus, the chemicals, etc., that can change any expression. I have seen physically, because I used to do a lot of reproductive hazard evaluations when I was in aerospace at the beginning of my career after OSHA. And in this, where birth defects should have occurred, being it would have like 100% been birth defect, but that person had a constitution, or their family did, in a higher belief system, meaning believing in God, and prayed, and that child was born with no birth defects, no metabolic disorder, no physical defect at all. So
as a scientist, you're saying it should have happened, but it didn't.
It should have happened. The odds were 100% that it was going to happen, and it didn't happen. So that's telling me that through their prayer, or through, like we've had, each one of us have had experience with the portals to destiny, whether you believe what's in the text of that book or not, it just, the harmonics of when you read it aloud, it opens up an antenna within yourself, and things happen in a good way for that person. And it's all this other, not that it's hidden, but it's hard to explain. I could get into debate with fellow scientists and they say, well, I don't believe in this, this, and this. It doesn't matter. I prove it in the science, but I still believe in God. And I believe that it's not limited. It's not limited to the whole thing, because it created everything that's here, as far as I'm concerned,
That's like medical doctors have told me, and of course there are scientists as well. It's all the same thing. It's man's knowledge. I've had, I'm thinking now, 3 different doctors tell me that medical science, medicine, modern medicine is great, but there is a factor where modern medicine can do nothing, and only something else can take over, and then that's where they say it's either faith, or it's prayer, or it's something that they can't explain. But the funny part is one of those is an atheist, does not believe in God. He says there is something else there, but of course he says it's not God. Mm-hmm. And the other two are not very religious doctors, but they have told me that yes, that's the God part that we can't explain. Modern medicine does miracles, but those kind of miracles where modern medicine says it can't happen, that has to come from an entirely different place. And they can't explain it, but at least they see it. And that's an important thing.
Right, because those miracles do exist, and whether we call it God, whether we call it the Creator, the universe, whatever the name is, in my heart there is a higher being that controls, well, not even controls, that lets it unfold and be you and do it. But I will say from observation, ones that do not do little acts of kindness, it seems like the rain really pours or the sky falls, like in Chicken Little, on them. But things do happen,
Your new product, I love. I saw your new label today for your Chicken Little. And I showed it to my family. Everybody went, wow, that's great. So,
yeah, thank you. That's in honor of a colleague of mine, Dr. Ben Coldezon, who did the paper Chicken Little 101 about in 2010 in January. He did a whole rendition, which I hope sometime to have him on our show, is the whole history of aerial spraying from pesticides all forward. But we made a product that helps and detoxifies and cleans the lungs, and it's the cutest little image of a Chicken Little Plus.
Mr. Dubob has returned to the...
Okay, great. What we were talking is in reference to higher creator, and that no matter what the odd is, in example like in birth defect or anything where I stated that there should be 100% that would happen, that birth defect, no matter what, through prayer or through intervention that way, the baby born did not have birth defect or any type of problem that way. So what we're saying, Rick, miracles do happen, and it seems as in appearance and also knowing it comes from a higher being.
And plus, I don't think we're entirely bound by heredity. I think that's a myth.
Well, I'll use myself as an example. I participated in early studies, which was Project Baby Sekhmut, where colleagues of mine, Bobby Tholander, Aurora Saccarillo, and also Dr. Faranak Bahi, participated in the study and observation of people that had Morgellons and people that did not, our controls. And what we found out, the ones that didn't get it were the ones that had tartar because of their GI tract and goat cheese and all what they ate in their lifetime or ancestry, and ancient military elite assassin Olmec. They had Olmec bloodlines. But in this, I've always been told I was German-Lithuanian, okay? I came back after that DNA test. I had 67 nations under my flag, So I go, wow. But what was the reality? What was the reality of that test was that when I looked at each one of those civilizations, even ancient Scythian or Egyptian archer, each one of them that they matched, because they, as I told you earlier in the show, they match the DNA of all these museums or these archaeological finds where they find archers, etc., and they match those bloodlines, those DNAs. The thing is, I knew who I was in humanity.
Wow.
I also knew why I like certain Greek dishes, why I like certain Italian dishes. It made total sense to me, in what it was. It's like even if you had showed that you had Aztec bloodline or Mayan, maybe that's why you crave certain edible flowers or any of this. It's expressing, and from that, does it express your own temple into a better way, as to be the best of what you are, with the best ingredients. And also, I went and had it done, and then you can compare, which I loved because under our toxicogenomic function is that you had a baseline so that if anything ever changed, you got rained on by foreign DNA or anything that happened, you knew what you were before, and we could see how that DNA overlaid on your DNA, which would not allow. I even had in this study 3 individuals that tested for a aspect of the allele that was over 4 million years old.
Wow.
So I thought that was done by a
like
major laboratory, so it wasn't like, your own labs within, because I always contract out. But 3 individuals, and they're very good friends, and but they had this particular portion of their DNA was 4 million years old.
Well, now this is so interesting.
So.
But in terms of, and then just to throw a little contrast in, I remember I met years back Dr. Richard Stroman, who's a molecular biologist at Berkeley, and he wrote a book and said, in which he said, only 4% of human disease is inherited via DNA. And they play very fast and loose. Well, your father had a heart attack. Well, that's why you had one. I thought it was a nice contrast. It was at least opened up the discussion.
Well, I think it's great that we found out that Dr. Hildy is now Heinz 67.
Yeah, you got it. Never changed. But let me tell you, my highest titer was 845. One of the male controls was 136,000 titer for Basque. So what does that tell you? I had a lot of junk DNA. So who knows what my somatid's going to do? You know what I mean? When it comes out.
The world calls it junk.
Yeah, the world calls it junk, and I'm going to create a whole new company that's going to specialize in junk DNA. There's many business in garbage,
Yeah. I will put this out to you guys and to our audience that you talk about Basque. I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley in Encino, as you know, Dr. Hildy.
Uh-huh.
And actually, Encino, they think the San Fernando Valley has no history, but Encino was founded by French Basque.
Oh,
I thought that was Encino Man. Sorry, I just throw that in there. It was a good movie.
Yeah, it was. It was funny, but that's very interesting because an audience are. If you study Basque and Castilian, and I'm going to call it Hispanic, on that end, the Castilians were light-haired, blue eyes, and they were known as the first blue bloods because they had such fair skin that their veins, you would see the blue underneath, and that's what they called the blue bloods. And the Basque primarily were O negative.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because now there's a battle because they were always saying that O negative was all part of this other line because O blood can donate to any of the other bloods, and all of that changes with what foods you eat, et cetera, this way. But it's interesting now I'm seeing the battle between O positive and O negative in theory, what all bloodlines they lead to.
Yeah, but you know more about genetics than I do, Hildy. But is it, I think there's 2 schools of thought. One says that your DNA is immutable. And then there are others who say, no, it's totally mutable. It's changeable all the time. Is that correct?
Correct. I'm of that school of thought because I've seen how, like these initial studies that we did in baby Sekhmet study, which we'll have posted on this show and also on our Omics show at the end of the month. The thing is, they changed. They changed as a result of eating foods that were of those ancient genes, meaning those civilizations. When they incorporated and they got over their illness and also their problems. Then also with the introduction of gene therapy, you can change your gene, meaning you can manipulate it. Now, the thing is, the problem with that is it only manipulating what we know about that family inherited gene 5 generations back? And is that, if they change that, is that going to cause something else happen with the ancient gene that might be 5,000 years old? And those answers people don't know. But we have this, to answer your question in my long version, Rick. The thing is, we see it every day in genetically modified food. They can do that in food. That food can interfere with our genes, as we've seen it now in society, and also what we're seeing with the inoculation of 150 million embryos 2 weeks ago in London, with all these manipulations and growing, human blood in rice. Yes, you can change the genes. Excuse me, human blood in mice, not rice. But maybe rice is going to be the new one, because they're taking human gene and putting in the mammary gland of a cow in China, so that then you can have mother's human milk, And I'm going, oh my word, it's like the ghosts with the spider webs,
Yeah.
Anything goes right now.
It raises the whole question of or at least all this nanotechnology and genetic modification, it all raises the question of they raise the question, I should say, the issue. Well, what is natural anyway? I mean, they throw the whole idea that anything God-given and natural into this limbo state where, well, who says that the natural is the one way? We can make it different.
Right, and what is being forgot is that to make you, Rick, Michael, and Hilda, it had to take umpteen generations, and the best of those generations and those nationalities, those tribes, to be expressed to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you've taken the best to survive and amplify it and make it the hybrid, and say that hybrid got exposed to different chemicals and that, then it's hybridized to even more, then when you're playing this game of using other genetically modified situations or changing or plasmids or vaccines that have the plasmids in it or different viruses, you can get different diseases to express. You could be totally dormant of not having anything, but then get exposed to an adenovirus that was suppressed by generations, but now it's going to suppress and give you tumors of the kidney.
Well, let me make a comment to just jump this up a rung on the ladder here.
Go ahead, Michael.
We're talking about genetics from our standpoint of understanding DNA genetics as much as mankind knows at this point. That's kind of like, to me, the plans for a house. All right, we've got a set of architectural plans, but there's we can erase certain parts and we can modify part of those plans and build a different structure. That's kind of what genetic engineering is doing now. It's altering the plans after the plans have already been drawn out. Now, there was an architect who created those plans and came up with the idea of what that house is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
That architect is the only one he's the creator of those plans. That architect is the one who can decide at any time that those plans can be altered the way that he wants them. However, if they're altered after they've already been drawn, that's not the creator's plan. Now, this is what's happening with genetics, with science now. It's altering the master plan, so to speak, for the construction of the DNA. It's altering that master plan by erasing this spot and adding something else over here, or moving that wall to go over there. It's not the architect's plan anymore.
Yeah.
Right. The prime example was what I used last week on the show, meaning the scientists changed the clone puppy DNA so that it would glow in the dark green, so they wouldn't trip over the dog. But The original architect didn't have it fluoresce to begin with. It wasn't like a firefly.
Firefly dogs, you got to watch out for them.
Yeah, and it's like everything's getting twisted. As Rick did a beautiful quote, but it's basically rollover nanotechnology, synthetic biology is coming right down the pike.
But it only has a certain amount of effect, though, and that's what I'm trying to build this up to, is mankind now can manipulate genetics all they want, but there's only to a certain point that it can happen. The master plan is something that really can't be changed no matter how much you want to turn around and write over it and change a wall. It's still there, and that's that.
I agree.
Well, that's that spiritual aspect, and
right. It's that fail-safe switch. Whatever it is planned, it's there. No matter how you manipulate it, how you change it, it will be expressed, and it will come when the time is right, when it's needed to do.
Now, this is what the ancient texts talk about. Okay, and that's why I said like almost an hour ago. This is nothing new about synthetic genes and all this kind of stuff. Actually, this is old school, because you get into the ancient texts, and that's what Dr. Farrell's book was about. Giants, monsters. Well, the ancient texts talk about them, and that was where you have, for example, in Enoch, and that's a great example of the Book of Enoch, and it's called Enoch 1. You had the Watchers, which were these angelic beings, and actually, according to the old text, they were called gods. So you have these created beings that are, and for lack of a better term, spirit. They are not 3D manifested flesh. And they thought that the flesh creation called mankind, which includes womankind, if you want to put it that way, man and woman is mankind. The two of them together. Man by himself is not mankind. Woman by herself is not mankind. It's the two together that create mankind. So here, these spiritual, non-mankind beings decided that this creation that God had made, called mankind, that the female of that mankind was really nice looking, and they manifested themselves to her realm. And then you've got basically hybrids that were created between flesh and spirit. And this is where the giants come from.
Interesting.
And that's not just the giants. There are different giants. There are lots of texts, all in Hindu, Himalayan, Aztec, everything. If you go through everything that you can find on it, that everyone has the same story about how there were giants on the land, but some giants were taller than others. So when angels, let's put it in Christian terms, since that's what most people are familiar with. If an angel, one of these watchers, were to manifest into our realm, in our 3D flesh realm, every time in every ancient text, and even those who talk about modern sightings of beings that can't be explained, they're tall. They're like 20 foot tall, and have a glow. All right, and nothing has changed. But then now, what do we have? We have archaeology, and Robert Ghostwolf, as you know, Hildy was big into finding the truth behind this. But he's not the only one. There are so many others. Every continent, every land, and on this earth, the same thing has been found. We have these 9, 10, 11 foot tall skeletons that look like they're us, but they're too tall. Well, those are the hybrids, what the Book of Enoch, Enoch 1, called Nephilim. And there are names, again, in every culture, every religion, for the same thing, and that is man, angel, spirit, or however you want to put it. It's the two realms combined. So, yes, there are giants in the land, but angels, again, in Christian terms, because that's what most people recognize, angels have always manifested as giant, large beings, and then they also manifest as you and I, where you can't tell the difference. they are able to morph, or however you want to put it. They can go from their realm to our realm. But while they're doing it, their appearance is gigantic until they completely come to our realm.
Michael, I would like to get your opinion, and you too, Hildy. I did read a couple books about based on the premise that the Earth is hollow, and that once you enter into it gradually in the North or South Pole, then there are a kind of a reverse version of continents and oceans inside. And there's this story, of this. When he was young, this Norwegian man and his father went, sailing up to the North Pole, and they ended up in the inner Earth. Now, this is their description. I'm not saying it's true for sure or not. And they found very tall giants there.
Well, we've got skeletons of them in every continent on this Earth right now. They're constantly being found. I've seen them, and it's fascinating. And but my question is about the hollow Earth. If it's true, it must be such a well-guarded secret, because you certainly can't fly over the North Pole. It's illegal. I don't know. I mean, I'm open to any possibility here. Well, we have to look at the non-human aspect of it in order to even try to understand it. Everything in this world, the way the shadow spirits of this world run things, they don't want us to know. They don't want us to think outside the matrix that they have created. I know these are lots of terms I'm throwing out there, but
yes, but it's true.
The Matrix movie is true in a big respect. It is a fake world, so to speak. And then, yes, we still have our flesh, and we still do exist the way we are, but what we're being told is not the truth.
Yes.
That's how you control mankind. That's how you keep mankind as a slave. And what does every religion say? That the creator of mankind has, whether you're going to call it fallen angel or whatever, there is one who came from the same creator in a different realm who held himself to be just as powerful as creator was. And I'm oversimplifying this, but trying my best. And that that one has been called the dark spirit, Satan, whatever name you want to put on there, and he is here at the earth. So again, in Christian terms, if you're going to understand the Christos consciousness that became in our realm in flesh, Jesus, what was the first temptation he had? Well, he had that temptation, who was in control of everything on the earth, because this is where he ended up. He's no longer in that spirit creation where he was. That being had control of all the kingdoms. So what was the first temptation for who was the pure blood man, the Son of Man? Well, the first temptation was, if you'll do the way I want it to be done, and I'll give you all these kingdoms that I've created. Well, there's the matrix. And see, a lot of people try to add too much to it. It really is pretty simple.
And what is it? I'm not a Christian per se, and I don't know the Bible, but that thing about when you talk about evil, you're talking about principalities and kingdoms.
Well, principalities and powers, which control the
in high places.
Right. Well, for somebody who's not a Christian, you have a better memory than most who are Christians.
I do have a good memory.
But they are principalities and powers. These, as in Christian terms, these are the spirits that rule. I call them shadow spirits because they're no different than the watchers back in Enoch, the book of Enoch, who fell, and there were 200 of them according to that ancient text, and they fell and perverted the image of mankind, which was in the image of Creator. And what do we end up with? We ended up with hybrids. half man, half spirit, or half man, half angel. What are you going to put? And then here's what's even worse. And I wanted to bring this up because we only got like 10 minutes, and this was something I definitely didn't not want to be mentioned. Besides that hybrid, that human hybrid, we have where those same Nephilim creatures, these hybrids, also, along with the fallen 200 watchers or angels or spirits, other creation, combined with animals. And this is where we see in petroglyphs, we see even in ancient texts in
the
different
chimera.
languages. We see a human body with a bird head. We see a human body with a dog head.
Absolutely.
We see dragons that look like human, but they're really not. Okay, these things are not imaginations. This is crossing realms. It's the best way that I put it. It's crossing realms. It's taking different creators' creations in different realms and combining them. That's where I wanted to bring that up for one reason. What we think about genetics now is the bottom rung of the ladder. We think we're so powerful in mankind to be able to change genetics synthetically and all that. That's nothing. That's only scratching the tip of the iceberg, because we will never control genetics. Never. We might think we can, but there's that creator factor in there.
I agree.
And that creator isn't going to allow it to happen, guys. Now, it might appear that way. We might look like zombies according to bad 1950s movies. We might be deformed as a human race, but you are not going to steal the blueprint from the creator of those plans. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah, that's when.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. You can do little subtle, you can do little crude manipulations within it, but that's all you can do.
It's manipulate.
Right?
But it's manipulating from the bottom rung of the ladder. There are so many other steps higher than our genetics.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. They're not at the peak. They're at the foundation. Like the four corners of a pyramid, and who's the capstone? That's where you want to be at the top.
Hildy, I think they're just monkeying around like on a very primitive. They call it sophisticated, but none of it's sophisticated. It's actually very crude.
It is.
And it does not have that higher dimension to it. It never will. Although they will cause a lot of trouble along the way,
Sure.
That's my opinion on that.
Mankind might look like zombies. I kind of joke about that, but I've seen it in my spiritual visions where, there's deformed mankind. That could come in our practical knowledge, or I should say our intelligence that we have now scientifically. We could have a bunch of zombies within the next 2 years all around the world just from the nuclear radiation in the air.
Right,
Yeah.
and the mixing of nanowires and going in, through your nasal cavity to your brain, meaning
all the things.
It could really screw up your electrical thought process of your brain,
May I ask you something, Hildy?
It's all kinds of wild cards. Yes.
Yeah, but Hildy, I want to ask you, Dr. Hildegard Staniger, I want to ask you a question. Sorry to be so informal, but we are friends. What do you think? I'm always thinking of the coordination of all these events, and I can't help but think that all the nanowires and the nanotech and the nano hooks and everything, that they are not. Someone did not think about, what would happen with those in conjunction with radiation?
I don't think they thought of that. They didn't even think of, the health and safety of it. Now the papers are coming out, and the text that, like carbon nanotubes are harmful to the lungs, et cetera, this way, meaning they are coming out. I don't think any thought was put into the health and safety by, I'm going to say, the scientists that were funded or engineers on that research. There may have been some other thought by whoever the mastermind is of who's funded the projects or going in funding the whole concept, because as I stated early in the show, even with Dr. Farrell, you can overlay genes and make a gene not express or retard it, just as Michael said, but it's there, it's not disappeared, it will express whenever it's supposed to be expressed. But the thing is, this same manipulation can occur with the nanomaterials. It was never thought that it could go into the cell. Now they know it goes into the cell, et cetera, into the nucleus. But how do you get it out?
Hilda, what about synthetic, nano, whatever, well, especially those two, cell alterations that could genetically thrive on radiation?
Yes.
Do they exist?
Definitely, because that's what I was talking about with that Belarus gene for gene therapy, so that the people that were exposed to Chernobyl, they collected their blood samples, which was in Belarus, a country near Russia, and found that the ones that survived, they used their genes and thus to make a vaccine against radiation. So that's telling you they're already looking at it, that's already commercially available. Yes. And that's where I had a person that had previous tests in baby Sekhmet and then got tested again just to see what was going on, and we found that they had higher amounts of Belarus, meaning 7,000 titer, versus originally it was 21. So where did the extra one come? Laboratory said, well, our equipment got better. Well, it was there to begin with. It wasn't that better because the other genes that were on the allele were disappeared, covered up by this new, more Belarus, Now, it's interesting that we're talking about Belarus because in Dr. Farrell's book, where he brings out in reference to Tiamat, the productions and the battle of the gods in the cosmic war, which he referenced in Genes, Giants, and Monsters, he goes into a whole thing of the remains of her remains, which were in heaven, of Belus. Belus, which was supposed to be a female. I thought it was interesting just in the name Belarus, which is a country, in near Russia.
Very interesting.
I just think it's very interesting that way, that whole concept. Her remains were supposed to be the modern heaven and earth were fashioned. And remember, Rick, you told me in one of your readings of the Sumerians that their whole goal was all of their translations, or what you were reading, was to unite or to bring together heaven and earth.
Yeah, it's called Dur Anki. One of the translations is bond heaven earth.
Oh, I like that.
The Dur Anki.
So we could look at the person that had the 7,000 Belarus gene that is now bonded to earth and heaven and ready for the immortals to come. There's a new movie coming out, November 11th, 2011. Get it? 11/11/2/11. Yep. And it's called The Immortals. That's when the gods, with a little g, have to find a hero on Earth.
Right. Oh, gee.
We're going to have...
Go ahead. At the end of the show? It says,
yes, we're hearing the music. We're coming to the end. We've got about a minute left. I want
to say, Michael, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Well, same from my end, and
it was great to
do this again.
And we'll do this again, gentlemen.
And it was great to have my great personal friend, Mr. Dr. Joseph Farrell. He is a great friend of mine, and great to have him on, and great to see you, Dr. Hildegard.
Okay.
And it was just wonderful.
And next week, I want to tell our audience, our show is going to be on raw sugar juice with the owner of Raw Sugar Juice, Ray Koo. I forgot her name. I'm sorry, Ray, just in that second. But I enjoyed both of you being on my show, and also Dr. Farrell. Thank you very much for coming and being on the show, even though we had obstacles in the beginning with our connections. But we did get plugged in, and we're ready to go.
Hey,
and
in the podcast on the archives, that's all gone. So
I know. It's a miracle of what our producer and director do, and that is amazing.
And by the way, Michael, thank you
for... Lynn does that.
Michael, thank you for calling me on the side and making sure I was still here when I lost my connection. I appreciate that.
That's the job of a host, apparently, at least on the switchboard, anyway.
Oh, well, great to be with both of you and Dr. Farrell, of course.
And more shows to come. And at the end of the month, you'll be joining us, and maybe you'd like to join us. Michael, we're going to have the show on ancient genes, omics, and bioethnoticity. We can expand in our thoughts on today's and focus it from international trade with Mesoamerica. Okay?
Just wait till my book.
Okay, you're going to be there then. So book your date, the 31st of August. Okay? As Dr. Yul Brynner would say, shall we dance? We'll be dancing. Okay?
Thank you, Hildy, and thank you, Michael.
Okay.
I enjoyed it very much.
Okay, and God bless to you, audience. Whatever your beliefs are, there's someone higher looking after all of you. Bye-bye.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.